Okay, so we're back, and we got the engine back on the bench again. And I wasn't gonna show this step, but I decided I probably actually better, just because it's sort of important for this technique and this process, to give you guys further explanation on how I'm actually gonna take some of this paint that we sprayed on off now. So, as you guys remember with the SP units, if we look at the prototype photos again, let me shut this light off so you can see it a little better. You guys can see that blotchy SP paint. You have a lot of paint chipping up in the top, on the air compartment here, and all over this side of the hood here, on the battery box door, and that's what we need to try to cover and replicate here now. So if we turn this back on, we can zoom back in on the model, which I have here. At this point, I have not clear coated this, so this is not sealed up in any way, okay? Now you can do this two ways. You can clear coat it, however, it'll be a little harder to remove some of this fresh acrylic paint off of the model at this point. So I want to do this while it's still fresh and it's easier to peel off before I clear coat it and then move on to anything else. So what I'm going to do to take off the paint is use Q-tips. Some people have talked about using that hairspray technique, and though that technique does work well, and I have seen it work pretty decently, I myself, I'm kind of turned off by the method, just because with a prototype like the 2870, 2738, excuse me, where it has not as heavy paint chipping, or maybe the weathering is not as heavy, I don't want to just go full bore on with that method, because the thing with the hairspray technique is that once you start scraping at the paint, large bits of it start to kind of peel off, and you don't really have any control of what's actually coming off and where. And this is why I like to do this method, because I can take this Q-tip, wet it down, and put it exactly where I want the paint chipping, and control exactly what the paint chipping actually looks like, compared to if I sealed this up, which is the same method basically as the hairspray technique, where you seal it up and have some sort of tacky coating on it. That way it doesn't all come off, but only some of it peels off. It's a cool effect, yeah, but for this, it just, I need to avoid going full on with, uncontrolled paint chipping effects. It does work in some cases, but in this case I want to keep it relatively simple, if any of that jibber jabber just made any kind of sense to you guys. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take a wet Q-tip, but just a very lightly dampened Q-tip. I don't want to take a whole bunch, or I don't want to get a whole bunch of moisture on this. I want to keep it sort of dry, and then I just want to basically concentrate it in certain areas at a time, and then just work basically at a controlled pace. So if we start at the corner of the hood looking down on these battery box doors, I want to fan some of this out and make it look a little blotchy and uneven like the real fading is. So with the end of the Q-tip rolled up like this, I'm going to take it and I'm going to start sort of scratching at the layer. And do you see how it starts to take some of that paint off? Basically that's what I'm doing, but it's a little more controlled this way. Got a little more moisture on this. There we go. But as you guys can see, it starts to get that uneven sort of wash effect in a way, and that's what we're trying to replicate basically, is this technique here. So I'll grab some more Q-tips and we'll keep working here. Here we go. We'll get to the area where the Pacific is and keep doing that little method here. trying to kind of blend some of this together here by patting the Q-tip in the area. Takes some of that excess paint off, and it helps to fan out some of these edges, that way they don't look so rough. If I can get this adjusted a little better, you guys can basically see what I'm going for here. Go back over this little area. Again, just kind of keeping it concentrated in the areas I was working in, not trying to go outside the lines, if you will. I'm only doing this technique in the areas where it shows on the prototype. And then this technique, I'm just taking the Q-tip, and I'm sort of, it's hard to describe this, but I'm taking it in a blotchy motion, and then at the same time kind of going like this as I lift up on it. If you guys can kind of see that. It sort of fans things out a little bit by doing that. It's another neat little trick you guys can do. And I'm doing this the opposite direction, basically to get the same effect. But you can see it creates that blotched out kind of paint, where it's not total paint chipping, but it's very uneven, blotchy fading, basically, is what we're trying to create here. On this part of the hood here, this is an example of another technique, and I'll demonstrate this just a little bit. You guys can see the relatively heavier paint chipping on the cabinet or the clean air room duct. This is done with a microbrush. Stuff like this you can do with a microbrush like this, and it gets you a pretty decent effect on some of that chipping, but it creates more of that defined kind of chipping, not like what we were doing before, where with this I want to actually create areas that stand out a little stronger, where it legitimately looks like some paint chipped off or scraped off. So up in this area, I've just been taking this microbrush, which is just lightly dampened, and going over and then just kind of scratching at the duct to take some of that paint off and then create like a paint chipping effect, if you will. It's a little too strong. I'll just fan that out. Don't be afraid in a case like this to go back and forth between techniques to get what you want. There I'm creating just another little highlighted spot on that duct, but that's the basic effect there. Now on to the SP, or the southern part of this. Again, there's some relatively interesting and somewhat heavy paint chipping, so this time I'm going to go in straight with the microbrush. I'm going to wet it down like this at the bottom of these doors. I'm going to start taking some of that paint off and around this. You guys can see those nice little detailed effects there. Just in a situation like this, it's easy to kind of get carried away once you get into it. You find it's really easy and you start kind of just going ham at it. But just control yourself as you're doing this. You don't want to go overboard. Just in the areas like on the prototype, follow the photos as close as you can is what I was trying to say. Get it as close as you can. Continue with these little nicks and scratches on the hood here. Against the area, or against the walkway rather. It's pretty heavy at the base of these doors, just in this particular corner. Okay. Now what we'll do is we'll take the Q-tip again, and we're gonna blend these in just a little bit by smudging some of the paint out, just blending things together. guys can see how cool that's looking at this point. It's pretty sweet. Dampen it down a little bit more. Keep going. A little more in this corner here. A little scrape there. A little scrape there. In that corner. Okay, so that gives you the basic idea. You guys can see those rough paint chipped effects. So now what I'm going to do is move on to the top in the next video. What I'm going to do now is switch over to the other side and basically repeat this process to do this. And I'm going to hit up the trucks again a little bit too with this method to make them look a little bit more streaky and blotchy. But in the next video we'll show the roof